It's the Believe in Texans podcast brought to you by FanDuel. And if there's one thing that those of you who know me know, it's that I try real hard and I am generally unaffected by people's grades from the outside, power rankings, everything else. And yet sometimes maybe in the offseason when there's just less going on, obviously in the NFL, I find myself getting riled up a little bit. And this is coming from somebody who last week gave the Texans a C plus up to that point in free agency. That was before the Wyatt Teller signing and I believe another couple signings. I'm going to revise that grade today. I'm going to base it on some informed opinions, some opinions from smart people that I vehemently disagree with, but also my own noggin right here. We all know how reliable this noggin is. Right now, the Texans are the 7th favorite to win the AFC on FanDuel, behind the Bills, the Ravens, the Chargers, the Chiefs, and the Patriots. They're one spot above the Jags. The Texans are at plus 1,000. The Jags are at plus 1,100. I find a reason to get personally offended by each one of those teams that are above the Texans. The Bills, the Ravens, the Chargers, the Chiefs, because the Texans beat all those teams. I know there was no Lamar Jackson. The Patriots, okay, that's a whole different story. But that's where we are right now after the Texans have finished their first round of free agency. I want to go through some of the grades from ESPN and The Athletic on some of the individual deals, on some of the bigger names or bigger contracts that the Texans pulled off this offseason so far. And I'll start right off with the one that I still don't get. Seth Walder, really intelligent guy from ESPN, but with the David Montgomery trade from the Detroit Lions, where you'll recall the Texans gave up a late fourth round pick, 28th pick overall, and the Lions gave up the 28th overall. No, I'm sorry, the Texans gave up the 28th overall. My goodness, and a 7th round pick plus Juice Scruggs to get David Montgomery. Seth Walter, he had graded that a D for the Texans and an A for the Lions. And what he said was this: at some point this offseason, the Texans needed to add a running back to team up with second-year man Woody Marks. They opted to do that early by acquiring Montgomery. Houston's running game was abysmal in 2025, ranking 31st in EPA per designed carry. The running back play wasn't ideal, but the biggest culprit of that poor performance was an offensive line that ranked 32nd in run block win rate. We know this. Though Marks averaged only 3.6 yards per carry, he still recorded 31 rush yards over expected. Oh, another sign that the offensive line was the problem. Yeah, look, we know the offensive line was a problem. There's no denying that. The problem I have with giving that trade a D is that he was acting as if they couldn't address any other issues on the offense that could make a difference at all. We know from watching Woody Marks last year that, yeah, there's a lot of upside. We also know that Woody Marks got injured just about every game he played in, and it was very dicey from week to week what his health status was. He's not a bigger guy, and he is also only one man. So in the absence of other viable running backs on the roster, the Texans needed to add somebody. So was the offensive line an issue last year in the run game? Of course it was. But to act like somehow the Texans are giving up way too much to bring in a guy that isn't even going to make a difference because the offensive line isn't any good. Those are independent issues. Those are independent problems. The 4th round, and I know when I speak in shorthand about this, I'll say the Texans basically gave up a 4th rounder. One of our listeners on Sports Radio 610 got really upset with me because he felt like I was not being honest when I would say basically a 4th round pick. By the point system, a late 4th round pick and a 7th round pick, next year's 7th round pick, plus Juice Scruggs. Even if you call Juice Scruggs a 5th round trade asset, which I don't think he would have gotten a 5th rounder from anybody else, but even if you call them that, it still calculates out to a 4th round pick to bring in David Montgomery. You got him on a renegotiated deal that's very reasonable, not top tier running back money or anything. I would have graded that much higher than a D, so I'm not even going to factor that into my overall grade. If we go somewhat chronologically, and we'll go rapidly through some of the re-signings, Ed Ingram, PFF gave this trade an average grade. They say it's a strong deal for Ingram, who hit free agency at just the right time after a career-high PFF grade in his 4th season out of LSU. He has just one season with a 60 PFF pass blocking grade or better, but His 79.9 PFF run blocking grade in 2025 ranked 6th best at the position. It's not a cheap deal for Houston, but given the early signs from this free agent offensive line class, this was obviously done right at the beginning of free agency, it's not too surprising to see him command $12.5 million per year. The projection they had for his contract was a lot lower than what I had seen elsewhere. A lot of people had him projected out at anywhere from $14 million a year to $17 million per year. I think the Texans getting him for less than that, and in a free agency market where there were a few guys that got big buku money, Tyler Linderbaum on the inside, if we're talking about interior offensive linemen, just blew everybody else out of the market. I think it was good to lock him up. If you're going to go for youth, Ed Ingram was the guy to retain. And then if you wanted to sign a guy, an aging veteran like Wyatt Teller, there were a bunch of those guys out there. And I think the Texans, in biding their time, probably had the right strategy there. I'm bullish on Ingram, not because he's a complete player yet. He still needs to improve as a pass protector. But there's very much a theme about what they were doing on the offensive line so far this offseason, and it's one of physicality. If you look at what they did when swapping out Titus Howard and then later bringing in Braden Smith, and we'll get to him in a minute, Trent Brown, Ed Ingram himself in the run game, and then Wyatt Teller, these guys are all very physical run blockers. And for a team that wants to kick it old school and establish the run, set up play action, et cetera, which has become more and more effective in the last couple of years in the NFL as defenses have gotten lighter, like literally lighter in body weight so they can address the pass game. I'm all for that strategy, and I think they set a theme for the offseason. Ed Ingram, retaining him was part of that. So I feel very good about that re-signing, and I think it's a very reasonable deal. Sheldon Rankins re-signed. The Athletic gave that deal a B. Rankins returns to the Texans, where last season he served as a valuable contributor along the interior of their defensive front. His pressures up the middle helped move the pocket and force quarterbacks in the direction of talented pass rushers, Danielle Hunter and Will Anderson. I don't need to explain that dynamic to you guys. Rankins, it really, he provides a lot more pressure than you realize, because it's not like he has gaudy sack numbers or anything, but so many of the sacks that the guys on the edges have gotten this year or had gotten last year came with good push up the middle and those guys spilling out to the edge defenders. And then some of the defensive tackles benefited from having those studs on the edge, obviously. It's a whole complementary thing. It's a synergistic effect. I think the other thing about Rankins that I like is when you pair him up with Tommy Togiai, you've got a classic dynamic where, hey, you've got one guy who's really tough versus double teams, really physical in the run game. Then you've got another guy who's a penetrator. And that's a time-tested method to kind of cover all the bases. You got a guy that's going to be really steady and strong in the run game. You got another guy who's a penetrator, and you can create two different levels of disruption on the offensive line. I like that a lot. I think those are the two guys to do it. We'll get to Logan Hall, who they signed a little bit later. Trent Brown was another one that the Athletic graded a B. That I think the biggest concern with him is just simply his injury issues. They say Pro Bowl selection in 2019, Brown remains a talented right tackle. The main problem with him involves durability. He hasn't played a full season since 2022 with New England. He suited up for 7 games with Houston last season, and the Texans won all 7 of those games, including the playoff matchup against Pittsburgh. But that's me putting that but in there. He continues to rehab the ankle injury that hampered him much of the 2025 season. The thing about Trent Brown that I love is that he is a massive human being. He's physical in the run game. He had a very stabilizing effect on that offensive line. I love all of that. In his 11-year career, he's only had 3 completely healthy seasons, and the last one was in 2022. So he's a guy that's headed on into his mid-30s, and he's a massive human being. He's 370 pounds, 6'8" or so, and it's hard for guys like that to stay healthy, especially when they've got a lengthy history of injury. I think that there's injury concerns with all of these guys we're going to talk about on the offensive line, except for Ed Ingram, really, and that's something that makes me a little bit still eager to draft on the offensive line. A lot of these guys are guys who are going to be great for a year or two, but beyond that, you probably shouldn't make long-term plans. The contracts aren't really long-term contracts either. So as much as I love to draft best player available, I've still got a hankering for some big fellas in the draft. And it looks like it might be a good year to be getting those guys late first round through the third round, guys that can come in and contribute early, but also there's some room for, you can be patient with them. They can develop while they have veterans starting above them. Reed Blankenship, who went through a little phase where it looked like they're going to be signing a whole bunch of defensive players and not address the offense. Blankenship delivered 2 outstanding seasons in 23 and 24. The Athletic gave this deal a B. He had a combined 191 tackles and 7 interceptions, but then had a bit of a down year in 2025. Texans are hoping he can provide additional support for a secondary that includes yada, yada, yada. We know all those guys. Yeah, one of the best secondaries in the league. And the entire season, they were playing without a steady, strong safety, just rotating guy after guy after guy due to injury or C.J. Gardner-Johnson being C.J. Gardner-Johnson or Jimmy Ward and his legal issues, whatever it might be. I think he is a solid football player. I think the upside for him is very large in this defense because it's philosophically a different defense than what he had in Philadelphia, where Vic Fangio and DeMeco Ryans are just very different. I don't even want to say schematically. They're different philosophically. DeMeco is a much more simplified offense, whereas Vic can get things. You can almost overload guys with the amount of mental work he wants to do before and during the snap. So Blankenship's going to be able to play a little bit freer. I do like that Blankenship comes from a scheme in Philadelphia where Vic Fangio is very, very concerned with not allowing explosive plays. And that's something that's one of the few areas the Texans defense has struggled in the last few years. So having a safety back there, a veteran guy who was a team captain in Philadelphia, in terms of him coming out of an environment where they are very, very careful to not allow big plays, now entering into a more aggressive environment. But still, I think DeMeco would like to have maybe a little bit of a cooler head that can prevail sometimes and reminding guys about where the threats are and what to watch out for and all of that. At the end of the day, you've got at the baseline 5 solid players, because I'll say Reed Blankenship, solid player, but with much more upside than what he showed last year. But at the very least, that's the baseline. And then from there, it goes all the way up to all-pro caliber. And the secondary, as long as they stay healthy, I feel very good about. I think at the price tag, that was 3 years, $24.75 million. I think that was a good deal. I would have given it a B as well. And B's and free agency are good grades to have. Braden Smith, he got a B on the Athletic, and what they say is Smith has started 105 out of 107 games in his career, but hasn't suited up for a full season since 2022. That's a little bit confusing, perhaps, because it's not like he's appeared in all games that he was eligible to appear in. It's that of the 107 games that he's played, he's started 105 of them. He's a dominant run blocker and reliable pass protector. His 2025 season ended prematurely with a concussion and neck injury sustained in week 14. Also dealt with injuries throughout his career and signed only a 1-year deal. Okay, well, it's 2 years, $20 million. I guess basically 1 year guaranteed. So, the injuries, again, I touched on this earlier. The injury is a concern with Wyatt Teller because of his age and injury history. Injury concerns with Braden Smith, with Trent Brown. Go back to, all right, they can still get more youth. They can still have more veteran players at some point, perhaps added. But I very much thought that was a reasonable deal. Who's a better run blocker than Titus Howard. And I think you could argue about who's better overall or what have you. Braden Smith is a specific type of player that I think Nick Caley and Cole Popovich wanted to be able to establish. Yes, we can play smash mouth football. Yes, we can run block. Yes, we're nasty. We're going to get after it. We're going to play through the whistle. Those kinds of players. I think Braden Smith fits that category. Wyatt Teller, the big hoss that lifted my grade up eventually because the Texans finally addressed the interior offensive line. I know we had talked about Braden Smith potentially moving down to left guard, and that's still something that could potentially happen during the season if there's injuries. But Wyatt Teller, who's played right guard since his first year in the NFL, but will probably move to left guard because he was A, left guard in college, and B, played left guard his rookie year in Buffalo. They said he'll move back to left guard where he played at Virginia Tech and will look to help improve a pass rush that saw Stroud rank amongst the most sacked quarterbacks in the league, and also pave the way for what the Texans hope is an improved rushing attack, and then go on to talk about the acquisition of David Montgomery. I really, really, really like the Wyatt Teller signing. The more I learn about Wyatt Teller, the more I fall in love with him. I'm actually going to do a little bit, and I'm actually going to give you reasons to love Wyatt Teller in a bit. Right now, the Texans on FanDuel are at 9.5 wins on the over-under on the season. You know how I've felt about that is that anytime DeMeco Ryans has a football team and he's in charge of the defense and they have the players that they have right there on that defense, I'm going to take the over on 9.5. I think that's very, very, very safe in my mind. That's how I feel about it. I feel safe about it. With the additions on offense, I feel even better about it. Obviously, CJ Stroud is going to be the X factor in all of this, and we hope we get to see a better version of CJ Stroud when he please, when he actually has a good rushing attack for the first time in his NFL career. Pass protection is nice, but man, a viable rushing attack helps out a young quarterback probably more so than pristine pass protection. Don't get me wrong. You need it, obviously, but the rushing attack takes so much pressure off of a quarterback, and then having a good defense on the other side, that helps a young quarterback as well. He's had that, but he's only had one of those two things. We got to get to the rushing attack side of things. I think Wyatt Teller is very much going to be an asset in that regard. But before I do that, I didn't give you my grade. Okay, they're up to a B. They're up to a B. When I gave them a C+ last week, I specifically said that if they get to work and actually bolster the interior of the offensive line, I think they're put in a position to head into the draft without a glaring need to draft a certain position. You want to go into the draft without any glaring needs so you can be more calm, cool, and collected, not any let of your subconscious fears or insecurities seep into your decision-making. I think they're there right now. I'd love to potentially see a tight end get taken, and I wasn't really talking all that liberally about taking a tight end a couple of weeks ago when I had more concerns about the interior offensive line and defensive line. Oh, dang it. I forgot Logan Hall. Logan Hall was one of the bigger signings that we need to talk about. Logan Hall. The Texans have sandwiched versatile, disruptive interior rushers that can take advantage of one-on-one opportunities against guards and centers. Hall is next in line to benefit from playing between Hunter and Anderson. I love this fit. This is an A by The Athletic. Hall has tools and athleticism, and he's coming off a career-high 32 pressures in 2025. The price is reasonable. I concur. I think Logan Hall is really going to thrive in this system, like so many defensive tackles have before him. When you take guys who have been playing in a little bit more of a conservative read and react style and put them into a scheme where they're encouraged to just get upfield and go and to penetrate, and then you couple that with Rod Wright, the defensive line coach, and his ability to coach and get the most out of guys like Sheldon Rankins, like Tommy Togiai, frankly, like Tim Settle, like Mario Edwards, like all of these guys that have come in and really played like the best version of themselves. I think Logan Hall's upside is huge. And if you look at the contract that he got, 2 years, $13.75 million, I think that ends up looking very affordable at the end of this season. If he stays healthy, that length that he is a tall guy and uses his hands really effectively in those moments where you see him in that mode where he just gets upfield and goes. I like him a lot. I think it's a great signing, part of why the Texans have a B. But to Wyatt Teller, first thing about Wyatt Teller that I love is that as a former defensive lineman, I usually am very hesitant to really fall in love with a guy who's super, super physical or a guy that has a lot of pancake blocks. A lot of times those guys are dirty players. But with Wyatt Teller, it's the exact opposite. He's an extreme technician, and he puts guys on the ground a lot. But it's because he uses his hands and he uses leverage really well. And I can't remember if I told this last week or not, but when I first started watching Wyatt Teller, I thought that he must have been a wrestler in high school. He was not. He was a swimmer in high school as well as a football player. But he uses his body weight and his leverage and his technique the same way a lot of guys who have a wrestling background do. Turns out he had a coach in Cleveland who was his name's Scott Peters. He's assistant offensive line coach, and he was also a Brazilian jiu-jitsu competitor. And he taught these guys all kinds of techniques for really just aligning all of your power and focusing it on into the tip of the spear, which is your hands, and he uses it to torque guys down really effectively in pass protection, in the run game. etc. And then you couple that with conventional offensive line technique, and he's really, really good. But when we start talking about, all right, are these guys that are going to fit this new culture that DeMeco wants on the offensive side of the ball? Cole Popovich, crusty old school offensive line coach, looks like he's grumpy all the time, looks like he's got a dip in, whether he dips or not, I don't even know. He just has the look of an offensive line coach who dips a lot. This is Wyatt Teller, when he was talking about when he was in Cleveland, Bill Callahan was his offensive line coach, awesome offensive line coach, crusty old dude. And this is Wyatt Teller talking about what type of coaching he responds to. And it's interesting.
There's players that you get yelled at and you shut down. And there's players that you yell at, they get mad and they play better. It sucks that I responded to the latter.
It sucks. So he knows it, that he likes tough coaching, and that's kind of what Cole Popovich is. That audio, by the way, was from an interview with Tyler Dunn from Go Long TD. Gave me permission to play it on here, and that's a great website. It's behind a paywall, but I am behind the paywall because I pay the subscription. He puts out a lot of great content. Here's Wyatt Teller on him getting traded from Buffalo. So he was drafted by Buffalo, played some in his rookie year, but ends up getting traded to Cleveland. One of the picks that they used ended up being one that they used to get Stephon Diggs. But here's Wyatt Teller on why Buffalo decided to trade a guy that would eventually become an all-pro guard.
They had another kid, Ike Butker, who's a really good player, but Ike had just come off an Achilles. He was supposed to get drafted. He didn't. So they picked him up with me. Ike is a very smart player. I'm not a dumb player, but it takes me a second. I have to study. I have to work. Now after year 6, it's a little second nature. But, at first I had to learn. I didn't know what frickin' duo was. No offense, in college, they didn't teach us anything. That man was at Iowa. That man knew offensive line play. So, it took me a second to kind of mature and learn that aspect of it. But I think that they truly believed that, Ike had a very high upside ceiling, and that I was kind of at my ceiling, or I was kind of playing, I might get a little bit better, but who knows? So I think that they were making a business decision with, hey, we have an undrafted guy, same size, same length, as smarter than Wyatt. So why would we, not use this as an advantage for the team?
And that rookie year, when he played at Buffalo, I saw some good things. I went back and watched some clips of him playing left guard in Buffalo. Showed that same physicality, showed a lot of the things that you would see in the more polished version of him. But obviously, Buffalo made a bad decision in going with Butker at the very least, because Butker would only be a starter for 2 seasons, and then has only played, I think he played in 2 games in 2023, and since then he hasn't played any football at all. So bad decision by Buffalo, other than using the pick they got for him as part of trading for Stephon Diggs. But I think that he is a guy that was not a high draft pick. He's very much a self-made player. I think he's going to be a really good example to younger players in that room. And I think by virtue of just him being a technician, but also being a guy that's, kind of like Azeez is on the defensive side of the ball. Azeez was a guy who was an undrafted rookie. San Francisco didn't think so highly of him that they chose not to retain him. He had some studs above him, and he had to really earn his way into the position of credibility that he's in now. And I also like that Wyatt Teller plays with the same ferocity that Azeez Al-Shaair does. My whole wish this last year has been, hey, DeMeco, you're awesome at identifying guys who play with that swarm mentality. You're awesome at identifying guys on defense who play a lot like DeMeco Ryans. I think DeMeco's good at identifying guys that are kind of kindred spirits to himself. We haven't seen that on the offensive side of the ball. I think we're starting to see the offensive version of that. I think that David Montgomery is 100% a DeMeco Ryans type of football player. I think Braden Smith and Wyatt Teller and Ed Ingram are also in that same vein. What I'm really optimistic or hopeful for is that in the draft, they get those same types of guys. That's what we start to see out of them. Some of the other interesting things about him, just simply, look, he's going to fit in Texas. He loves, this is a quote from another Tyler Dunn article at Go Long TD. My biggest thing, I love America, love my guns, love my hunting, love my fishing, but I also love having relationships with people that are different than me. and points out that he points to another teammate on his side of the ball who's A, super liberal, and yet B, also one of his best friends on the team. You still respect them, he says, as long as they respect you. So when it comes to hunting, fishing, gun ownership, all of those other things, I think he's very excited to come to Houston. But he also is like, and this is how it is in most NFL locker rooms. You've got guys on both sides of the aisle, some guys extremely on both sides of the aisle, but you figure it out. You all got a common goal. It's the beauty of sports or any other industry or venue where you have a lot of people from disparate backgrounds, but that they have a common purpose. They figure out like, oh, okay, people can be different, but be super cool to each other. And he sounds like that kind of a guy. So really excited about what this means for the rushing attack this year, the addition of Wyatt Teller, but also everybody else, and not to mention the guys that are already there, having one more year in the system. You know, Woody Marks isn't a rookie running back anymore. Some of the things that they were doing last year where Woody Marks couldn't be as involved in the passing attack, I think the presence of David Montgomery hopefully opens that up. And that's going to be something that helps out CJ too. It's nice to have a guy that's an actual weapon an actual weapon as a receiver, as a running back receiver, as opposed to a guy who's just an outlet or a last desperation pitch. So thanks, everybody. This is the Believe in Texans podcast. Like, subscribe, leave a 5-star review on Apple, and everybody have a great one.